There's something they never warned you about church hurt. It doesn't just break your trust in people. It breaks your silence. You know the moment I'm talking about. It's late. You kneel because some part of you still wants to pray. Even now, you open your mouth and nothing comes. Not because you stopped believing, but because the moment you try to reach for God, something inside you goes completely still. And in that stillness, the face that surfaces isn't his, it's theirs. Every day that silence stays, the wound keeps winning, quietly, in the exact space where your prayer life used to live. This video is going to tell you why, and it's going to show you how to take it back. What most people don't know, and what no one sitting behind a pulpit will ever have the courage to explain, is that spiritual betrayal doesn't just wound the heart. It rewires the channel through which you once heard God speak. Think about how you learned to pray. For most of us, it wasn't automatic. We learned it through voices. A parent who whispered a prayer over us at night. A pastor whose words opened something in the room that felt like the actual presence of God. A worship song that reached into a place we didn't know existed. A community that made faith feel real and close and warm. Those voices were never God, but they became the architecture of how we learned to reach Him. They were the frequency. And here is what happens when those same voices betray you. They don't just damage your trust in them. They leave their signature on the channel. So when you try to pray now, reaching for God through that same internal architecture, what you get back isn't His voice. It's the distortion of everything they left behind. And every day that distortion goes unaddressed, the wound keeps winning, not loudly. Quietly, in the space where your prayer life used to live. Have you ever sat in the silence after trying to pray and wondered if the problem was you? This is why church hurt is so different from any other kind of hurt. When a friend betrays you, they damage the friendship. When a family member wounds you, they damage that relationship. But when someone who claimed to speak in God's name wounds you, when they use scripture like a weapon, use the altar to control, use the language of love to manipulate, they damage the very instrument through which you once connected with God Himself. Your prayer life doesn't go quiet because you walked away from faith. It goes quiet because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between reaching for God and the specific vulnerability that got you hurt. Both feel the same, both involve opening up, and the last time you opened up that way inside something that was supposed to be sacred, you got hurt. So your soul learned, your soul remembered. And now it says do not open, not because it stopped trusting God, but because it can't find God behind the faces of the people who broke it. Here is the moment that changes everything. The silence in your prayer life is not evidence that God is far from you. It is evidence of how deeply you were wounded by people who used His name. Those are two completely different things. Most people who lose their prayer life after church hurt believe they have lost their faith. They haven't. What they've lost is access to a channel that got contaminated by people who had no right to touch it in the first place. But here is the paradox at the center of all of this. That channel was never theirs. The day Jesus died, the Gospel of Matthew tells us that the veil of the temple, the heavy curtain that separated every human being from the presence of God, was torn in two, from top to bottom. Not torn by human hands, torn by God from above. Because what happened on that cross was the permanent destruction of every gatekeeper, every mediator, every religious system that had ever placed itself between a person and their Father. The people who hurt you were not the channel to God, they were voices you learned to pray through. And they corrupted the path, but they were never the destination. Now I want to be honest with you about something. Knowing this truth doesn't immediately restore your prayer life after spiritual betrayal. The brain doesn't heal by being informed. Trauma lives below language. You can know intellectually that God is not the person who hurt you and still feel your chest tighten the moment you close your eyes to pray, still feel the words dry up. Still carry something that sits between shame and grief every time you realize another week has passed in silence. This is not a failure of faith. This is a body carrying something it was never designed to carry alone. And in this phase, and I need you to hear this, in this phase, most people decide they are the problem. They look at their silent prayer life and start to believe that maybe the faith they had was never real. Maybe it was borrowed from the institution. Maybe now that the institution failed them, there was never anything underneath. If you've ever sat with that thought in the dark, I need you to know this. You were not wrong about God, you were trusting the wrong translators. There is a woman in Genesis whose story almost never gets the attention it deserves. Her name was Hagar. A slave used by people who invoked God's plan to justify what they did to her. Discarded into the wilderness with nothing, no community, no altar, no one standing between her and the silence. And in that total stripping away, when every human structure that was supposed to represent God had failed her, something happened. God found her. Not through a priest, not through a system. Not through someone who held religious authority over her. He spoke to her directly, in the wilderness, in the silence that abandonment had created. And the name she gave him, spoken out loud in the desert, with no one else around, was El Roi. The God who sees me, not the God of the institution that discarded her, her God. The one she met when everything else fell away. That is what this means for you. The God who saw Hagar in the wilderness is the same God who sees you in the silence of a prayer that won't come. The people who hurt you contaminated the path, but they were never the destination. And El Roi, the God who sees, has not stopped watching. Rebuilding your prayer life after church hurt is not about going back. It is not about finding a healthier church, though maybe that comes eventually. It is not about forgiving fast or recovering on the timeline that makes other people comfortable. It is about something quieter and more sacred than all of that. It is about learning slowly that the space where your words used to live is not empty. It is waiting. Clear and quiet underneath all the noise they left behind. The way back to a genuine relationship with God after spiritual betrayal doesn't go through a building. It goes through the wilderness, just like Hagar, through the honest, sometimes terrifying silence. Through the words you couldn't say, finally said. Through the grief you've been treating as evidence of spiritual failure, offered back to the God who was watching when it happened. That channel was never destroyed, it was borrowed, it was occupied, it was made to feel like it belonged to them. It does not, it never did. And reclaiming it doesn't require healed faith or perfect theology or the courage you don't have right now. It just requires that you turn, even slightly, even wordlessly. Even with nothing but exhaustion and a cracked open heart in your hands, El Roi doesn't need your words to be polished. He doesn't need your faith to be unshaken. He just needs you to turn toward him the way you're already doing right now, and that has always, always been enough.